Hello and welcome back to the ShefF1 podcast with me, Rudy Blankbrown, Seb Alston and Amy Hammerslag. Today we've got some Australian Grand Prix predictions to react to and of course a bit of a preview for the upcoming Chinese Grand Prix this weekend. But before all that, we would just like to acknowledge the really sad news this morning that Eddie Jordan has passed away. For those of you unfamiliar with Eddie Jordan, he's basically just done it all within F1. He of course ran his own team, Jordan, built it from the ground, won a few races, some great success there, and then after they went bankrupt he was a key part, as Seb said just off air then, in Adrian Newey's move to Aston Martin last year, as well as punditry and commentary. So yeah, a huge loss for the F1 world today, and may Eddie Jordan rest in peace. Anyway, let's get into some cheerier stuff now after a banger of an Australian Grand Prix which took us into the 2025 season. We had action all up and down the grid, and we've got some predictions to react to now. We won't go through all of them just because I've had a bit of a howler and Amy and Seb have done very, very well. So so Seb, you've had a bit of a prediction turnaround, it seems.
Yeah, I think if anyone watched last year's predictions, I was absolutely horrific. Basically, I think it's fair to say my predictions are always useless. Whatever I said, the opposite would come true. But mate, it's new year, new me. I've got the poll right. I even got a flop of qualifying. Antonelli predicted
That's a very good prediction.
I predicted Hadjar as the flop of the race.
Yeah.
And mate, he didn't even make the race. So
Lando Norris winning as well.
Yeah, I other than driver of the day Hamilton, which I think whatever, that was just a bit of a gamble anyway. But yeah, I'm happy with that. Even Williams being best team, I was happy with predicting that. I mean, I didn't get a point for that, but still, happy with Albon finishing P5. So yeah, I mean, new year, new me, and mate, I think you've got to trust me for this weekend as well then.
Yeah. Well, we'll go into our Chinese predictions very, very soon, but let's just sort of have a quick wrap round of how Australia went. So, you both got the pole man correct. Lando Norris, of course, with a very impressive lap time to take him to the top of the timing sheets on Saturday. And then in terms of start of qualifying, I put Pierre Gasly, and you guys said Hamilton and Doohan. Sorry, that was a bit...
I was pretty happy with Doohan, though, to be fair.
Yeah, Doohan was decent.
He was really unlucky, to be honest. I think he was put on a weird strategy by Alpine and Q2. He was put on used tyres when everyone else was on new tyres, and obviously he was never going to be able to set a competitive lap time on them. And then when he was on his final run, Hamilton brought out the yellow flags. But before that, he was quicker than Gasly. Yeah. And I was obviously, as a Gasly fan, I was pretty worried that Jack Doohan, I was thinking he was going to get absolutely wiped the floor with. Mate, he's going to come in and beat him straight away. But yeah, I mean, in the end, he was a bit unlucky. But I hope they don't really, Briatore doesn't use this as an excuse to put the pressure on even more, because he was really quick, and I hope he can put that crash behind him and stuff like that, because I think he's shown quite a lot of potential and put loads of pressures on him. But he's dealt with it really well so far, I think. I mean, it would have been a really tricky race to have as the first, well, not the first, but basically your first race of your F1 career for Jack Doohan. And it was a tough watch to see his car absolutely mangled on the restart. But a really strong qualifying performance from him, no doubt about that. I mean, Q2 is really what set everyone apart from each other that sort of survived the first drop. 4 tenths behind Lance Stroll, of course. Gasly making it into Q2, who was my shout. Amy, you said Hamilton. I mean, it wasn't a bad day at the office on Saturday for him, but behind his teammate, huge expectations. The conditions would have favoured him as well. I mean, what went wrong for Hamilton?
I don't know. Obviously it's his first race, first time probably doing a competitive session in Formula 1 in a Ferrari, so I don't know, not too much pressure. I just thought maybe it could have been that dream start for him, but no, it just weren't to be.
Yeah, so I earned the point for choosing Pierre Gasly, the man one position behind Lewis Hamilton. So then we got on to the flop of quali. Seb, another wonderful prediction from you. Just talk us through that.
Yeah, Kimi Antonelli. Obviously, I just thought going into it that there was so much hype and expectation on him, but it's his first ever qualifying session, and we know he's going to, maybe put a bit of a risk here or there because he is so raw. And yeah, he just didn't quite get it right out in Q1. It was very, very close, but I don't think you can put too much blame on him for, I think, obviously rookie, first ever qualifying session. I mean, look, I think it's fair, and obviously made up for it later. But yeah, obviously you guys, Amy, Jack Doohan, I mean,
if it was probably maybe his 20th qualifying session, you could have maybe argued it was a bit of a flop, but it weren't. So, and Antonelli finished below him, so I think that's a perfect summary, to be fair.
Yeah, and then with Piastri,
that was a hate watch. That waiting to happen.
I have nothing against Oscar Piastri. I quite like Oscar Piastri as a driver, but I just thought it does seem like the kind of weekend, first weekend of the season, first time where the McLaren that is the quickest going into a race weekend, at the start of a season. And I just thought, home crowd, a lot of rain. We've seen very little of Piastri in the rain, so although he has impressed at parts, I was just thinking it could all come crumbling now. But no, he was fairly solid in qualifying as well. Not a million miles away from his teammate on pole. But then next up we had the podium, only 1 point awarded. Seb got the Lando Norris win correct, and then everyone else didn't really pick anything else up for that, so we'll just sort of move on pretty quickly from there. Our driver of the day prediction, so Amy said Oscar Piastri.
Well, this is what I was going to say, is I predicted Oscar Piastri to be first, my race winner, and obviously, even though I think Lando Norris, I knew he kind of was going to win that, I knew it was his own race for Oscar, and who knows, but do you think that Oscar, if he was allowed before the rain came if he weren't told pole position, do you think he genuinely could have got past Lando and gone on to win that race? Because it could have been so easy for Lando to be the one who made that mistake.
I'm not sure he could have got past him. I think obviously had the pace. I think he was quicker, but I think obviously being quicker, you have to have quite a sizable gap to then actually get past someone. So I think it would have been. I think Lando probably could have been able to step up his pace as well. But I do think overall he probably actually was slightly the quicker driver in the race, and he was just unlucky. I think when it came to that incident, I think they obviously both went off, and Piastri was just slightly more unlucky that he went off into the grass and couldn't get back on. So yeah, I think he had a really good race. I think he had a really solid race. His pace looked really good, and once again dealt with the conditions pretty well up until that point. So I think it's just an unlucky weekend for him.
I could argue as well, I could win this point because you two have gone for the same here. And Oscar Piastri actually went off, took him almost like a minute to actually come back on the grass. Managed to come on the grass at his home Grand Prix getting cheered, and actually finished ahead of Hamilton still. So he ran until he made the mistake, and obviously everyone makes mistakes, it was really rare, and went off sadly, but then still recovered his race and was able to get the points. And McLaren do still sit top of the constructors, just out. Or did they get demoted when Antonelli got
Mercedes
promoted?
Are at the top of the
because when Antonelli got promoted back to P4. Well, there you go.
So, but either way, I think it's obviously finishing P9 in the quickest car. I think you have got to take that into account. I think no one gets a point there.
Yeah, so Seb and I said Lewis Hamilton. We haven't even got round to our predictions yet. But Seb and I said Lewis Hamilton. Again, another sort of pretty forgettable day in the office for him. The car just wasn't up to standard. The team wasn't up to standard either. The first time, we were already seeing some cracks in the relationship between Lewis and his race engineer. But fingers crossed, with some better performances, that will be a little bit more smooth in due course for him. So from driver of the day, where I think
I can accept that.
Yeah, no points for any of us on driver of the day there, which is rare. We've got our flop of the day. Amy and Seb getting a point each, which is, to be honest, with the drivers that you both picked, is a pretty fair analysis to make. Seb, do you want to talk through yours first?
Yeah, I went for Isaac Hadjar. I think he's a driver that I wasn't really predicting to do that great this season, and actually he really shocked me in qualifying. I didn't think he was going to be the best of the rookies, finishing P11. Really good showing, but then to crash out on the formation lap, it's not great, is it? That is the definition of a flop.
It's not the dream debut, is it, for Isaac Hadjar? Which is a shame, because you brought up his qualifying pace there, and he looked really, really promising. He looked to be the most comfortable of the rookies, up until the Sunday. But then, that kind of error. I get it. Okay, you lack experience. This is genuinely his first F1 race as well. He's not one of the sort of fake rookies that we've got on the grid. But it's a shame. And then he was clearly very emotional about it afterwards, sort of crying away, and Anthony Hamilton doing the lovely thing of consoling him after that. Dr. Marco said that it was a little bit embarrassing for the team.
You know what I think's embarrassing? You, Dr. Marco, because I am getting sick of the way he's speaking as an old man about young new drivers. I'm sorry. It's actually really annoying. I don't mean to interrupt you there, but fine. He's really getting on my nerves. It was Bortoletto at the start of the weekend, and then it was Isaac Hadjar, and then there was someone else. I think
said Dylan was a C-Fit driver.
Exactly.
Bortoletto beat it.
And I'm not being funny. Your rookie Liam Lawson did terrible. And there's not been one good second, academy driver for Red Bull since Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
There's not. You've had Gasly, I'm sorry, but he got... And then you've had Alex Albon gone. You've had Perez, who was an older driver, come in, and then you tried to get a 32-year-old Daniel Ricciardo, and now you're putting Liam Lawson in the seat. I feel like I'm forgetting someone here. But it's just not working, and I can't see anyone on the current grid working in that Red Bull seat who's a junior. And I think you just need to calm down, stop talking about other younger drivers and focus on yourself, because I don't think you're in a position to talk about it.
Yeah, well, that's going on the TikTok.
Sorry.
Thing is, I do definitely agree. I think coming out and speaking about your own drivers in that event, it's never going to help them.
No.
Even though maybe it is controversial, I do actually agree. I think it was quite embarrassing from Hadjar, and I know that's maybe insensitive or whatever.
Come on, man. He's 20 years old. It's his first race.
I just think that in order to have that elite mentality, if you want to be the best, you have to have that mentality to be able to put it behind you. And obviously, we'll be able to see if he actually does that this weekend. But I do think in the moment, you have to be able to control your emotions and just go into the garage, and then you can do it. Let it out. But letting it out in front of the cameras, I don't know. And I think Helmut Marko, so I think he was right, but I don't think he should have said that to the press. I think also for Helmut Marko, control it and actually just, you can tell him behind closed doors, tell him, right, okay, look, you need to, going forward, when that happens, you do need to just hold it together, and then you can let it out whenever else. But I don't know. I think it was a little bit embarrassing from Isaac.
I mean, I understand sort of where you're coming from there, but I think Crofty said it on comms, basically, that maybe you sort of really realise how, doing this is completely okay. So it's the case of, he and his family have sacrificed so much for him to get into that position, of his first ever F1 race. He's probably had it dreamed out in his head since he was a kid, and that's what happens. Not before the race even gets underway.
He had a great qualifying.
It could have been points on debut, which could have been a really, really memorable thing for his career. It could have been something that maybe could have been put him in contention for the Red Bull seat.
So what I'm saying is that at the same time, he's then got to make the most of his. He's still got that opportunity. He's still got that in further races going forward. If he wants to prove to Red Bull that he's strong enough mentally to stay in that seat, I think that was an opportunity to show, look, okay, I've got a mistake, but I'm going to put it behind me.
Yeah.
I mean, still has the opportunity to do that. I just think that, I can get it either way. Obviously, he's a human. If I was in that position, I'd be sobbing my eyes out. So I get it from both ways. I just think that, I mean, maybe going forward, I'm sure he'll deal with it differently.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's a lack of PR training as well, because you've sort of seen with these rookies, they're slowly becoming more and more robotic. Antonelli gave this answer at a little interview recently, and it was just like, this kid has just got a script in his brain ready to go, while still being bouncy and energetic and stuff like that. But then, I feel like Hadjar, it will come with good results as well. I'm pretty confident that he will get them as well, Isaac Hadjar. But let's loop back to predictions now. Amy, you said Liam Lawson as your flop of the day as well, and there's no doubt that is a really, really good shout. Not the first Red Bull weekend that Lawson was looking for. Really disappointing result. Already getting them Checo Perez meme comparisons, and it's a really poor start for Lawson.
Yeah, really poor. I mean, it was also a bad qualifying too. Didn't even get out of Q1.
Could have been a sort of Checo special of qualifying really low and then getting driver of the day, because he overtook 8 people to get into P8. You know what I mean?
I think in regards to the race, he wasn't the only driver to go out. Obviously, it was a tricky conditions, but when your teammate, obviously a four-time world champion, but your teammate's finishing second in that car and you're crashing out and you can't even get out of Q1, it does look a bit dodgy. And for me personally, I loved it. I don't want to call on a driver's downfall. I have nothing against Liam Lawson, but Yuki Tsunoda, where he finished
P5 in quali,
and so I'm just a bit I'm glad that happened, and I hope Liam can pick up some points going forward now, but I'm just glad that was in the first race, and it kind of was showing, let's say, Helmut Marko exactly what Yuki's made of, and maybe it was a mistake going for Lawson, I can't lie.
I mean, it just nothing really aligned for him. It was the sort of disaster debut weekend that Lawson really did not need. But I mean, there are some stuff that can be fixed pretty quickly. He was running a different front wing to Max Verstappen, running a much more sort of skinnier one, and you could sort of see on the onboard cameras how much trouble he was having with front grip. It just looked like the car was so floaty at the front. Of course, as well, the conditions would not have helped with that. But Verstappen looked far more in control of that Red Bull with a different front wing, much more front end grip. So that might be a bit of a learning curve that Red Bull have spotted early on, which is good. But then I said Alex Albon, if anyone's interested, for my flop of the weekend. I meant to put Sainz, I just spelled it wrong. I got the wrong Williams right. No, not really. I really did think that, I didn't think it'd be a terrible weekend for Albon. just thought that Sainz had wiped the floor with him on debut, and that didn't happen. Albon actually, not only did he capitalise on his teammate, crashing out early on, he put in a really, really good display all throughout the weekend. It was an exemplar weekend from Alex Albon, proving that he is still the guy to lead Williams, or at least he thinks so anyway. But I'm sure Carlos Sainz will have something to say about that. That's enough about drivers now. We'll go on to our best team predictions. Amy and I both said McLaren, Seb said Williams. To be honest, 3 really, really good shouts, but you can't really argue with McLaren's dominance that weekend. It should have been a 1-2 realistically, maybe a 1-3 if Max could have sort of got himself in there. Of course, it was just some strategy issues, and that track just looked unbearable to drive on. So, not surprised that Piastri and Norris made such catastrophic errors, but thankfully for Norris, still out on top. Our shot predictions, less said about them, the better, I would say. There's a reason why they're shot predictions, and that is because they don't happen very often. That's about enough for Australia now. That is in the past. Let's move on to this weekend with the upcoming Chinese Grand Prix. Plenty to talk about as well going into this race weekend. One of the main talking points, of course, being the scrapping of this mini DRS, the flexi wings. So that could shake up the running order a little bit. Seb, what does this mean, sort of the implications on the rest of the grid, having this sort of mini DRS and these flexi wings being banned by the FIA? Yeah,
it's tough to say. Obviously before there was the FIA, they'd actually clamped down on it in pre-season testing and stuff like that, and they were trying to look at it, but then obviously after this race they decided it fit that they're going to clamp down even further, so it's going down from allowed 2 millimeters, which even itself is absolutely tiny, down to 0.5 millimeters, which is that even, you can't see that basically. So it's an interesting one because it's hard to say how much of an impact it will have, because if it's going to have any impact, it would be that teams get disqualified, and that's probably not going to happen, because I'm guessing that all the teams will be compliant with the regulations even as they are. So I don't think it's going to have too big an impact, because otherwise teams aren't going to be able to make a whole new rear wing from scratch in a week. So if they aren't compliant with it already, they're not going to be able to compliant with it this weekend. I don't think that the FIA would have done that if they knew that all the teams are going to get disqualified, because loads of teams have been taking advantage of this sort of flexi rear wing sort of thing. I think Alpine have been doing it. McLaren obviously has been the big one.
They were the spearheads about,
but the other teams as well. The one team that everyone's speaking about that it's going to benefit is Red Bull.
Yes, they never opted for it, did they?
Well, I think they just weren't able to take advantage of it. I think they just weren't able to get an understanding of how to actually implement that onto their car. So they've been one of the big advocates for trying to clamp down on it. They've got their way, and they're, I think an inside source of them told, I think, the race, saying that the stiffer the rear wings are, the better it is for them, and that was why they were actually quite optimistic going into this season, because they thought that all the teams were going to have it clamped down on. So it could benefit them. Realistically, though, I think it's one of those sort of things where everyone talks about it. It's like, oh my god, this could completely shake up the pecking order, and I don't think it's going to make much difference, in my opinion. I mean,
these flexi wings were nothing new before the Australian Grand Prix last weekend. However, Red Bull never being able to capitalise on it, in the second half of last season per se, does that sort of go to show how much of a loss Adrian Newey is going to be to the team if they couldn't really take advantage of such for the teams, an obvious technical sort of loophole to make the car quicker? Because I'm sure a lot of people, maybe just getting into F1, didn't quite understand how seismic Adrian Newey's departure from Red Bull was sort of at the start of last season. Okay, well, he stayed on, but now he's at Aston Martin, and he is basically the reason why they have been so successful for the entirety of the team's existence. He is just one step ahead with everything in terms of aerodynamics and everything technical on the car. And so, clearly already Red Bull, not being able to find loopholes that McLaren have been able to take advantage of, Alpine, like you said, as well. That really is telling of how much of an impact Newey's loss to Red Bull is already having. So these flexi wings, like you said, Red Bull should be taking advantage of that, and they will have a little bit more straight line speed in comparison to other teams now. So that could bring the fight closer with them and McLaren, but Max has already come out and said that there are a lot of unknowns going into this Chinese Grand Prix this weekend. Who should we look out for, Amy, if there's any teams that you think could benefit from maybe the flexi wing thing, or benefit from the Chinese circuit itself? Of course, very high speed, lots of straights.
Well, I'm not sure if you've heard, but there's been a bit of delay on actual parts of the cars getting there, affecting 4 teams specifically: McLaren, Mercedes, Aston Martin, and I can't remember the fourth now. But there's a 4th team. But apparently it's meant to affect all all of the teams in some way, some shape or form. But basically, so that could have something. They've had a 40-hour delay on able to setting up their cars, so who knows when everything's going to get there in time. They've not had enough time to prepare, and especially someone like McLaren, who may have to adjust that, that wing, who need that little extra bit of time to set up, won't have it. So maybe that won't help them, but I just can't see it. I think they're going to be the team to beat once again. I think we look back at last season as well with McLaren, who was nowhere near where they are now and still did so well in both the sprint and the actual race. So I think they're going to be the team to beat again. I think Red Bull, we're going to be able to see both drivers doing strongly. And you again can't miss out Williams. I think they were so strong. I think they worked so well as a team together. They're going to have that again going into this. So much optimism as well. Like Alex Albon said in an interview, he said, I wish this was later on in the season, not the first race, because they're so used to, working so hard that whole season to get in the points. And it happens so quickly for them in the first race. So I think they just have that team spirit, and I think the car is actually going to be really fast around there. I can't lie.
Yeah, Williams with sort of that trick up their sleeve of always being quick around circuits with a lot of straight lines. And of course, now that the grid's being sort of brought closer together with all this flexi wing controversy, Williams could really capitalise on this. And not only is the car quick in a straight line, it just looks quick generally. Like, that is a really good package that has been given to Sainz and Albon. And I'm sure the pair of them could take advantage of that. I'm pretty sure both drivers have some reasonable success around the circuit as well. I'm pretty sure it was where Albon scored his first points. If it wasn't his first, it could have been I think in his first season when he was at Toro Rosso, which just feels like, years and years ago now, because it was. But, I think that could have been where he scored his first points. So, nice bit of sentiment there for Albon, maybe a track that he can sort of play towards his strengths with. But yeah, Seb, anyone else that we should look out for?
Honestly, I think Red Bull are probably one of the teams to look out for. Red Bull and RB. Yes. I think Red Bull, obviously last year, it was their most dominant track in terms when it came to Max Verstappen. I think he won the race by over 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see, because that would suggest that the track suits them. And, obviously, it hasn't changed too much from last year, you'd think, the pecking order. Obviously, McLaren caught up as the season went on. But you'd think then that Red Bull, they will understand the track. And they should, if there's going to be one circuit that they can maybe get the better of McLaren on, it would be this one, you'd think. And also, I think RB, are still flying under the radar. I think the fact that Yuki Tsunoda, everyone's, been banging on about Williams because obviously they got the points in the end, they got the race result. But that should have been Tsunoda. If RB hadn't done some mental strategies, they always do, it seems, and mess up Yuki Tsunoda, he had the pure pace to beat Alex Albon over the weekend. So I think that, obviously it's a difficult one because they've got maybe, Williams have two drivers who you can probably trust a bit more than either of the RB drivers. But saying that, I think obviously you could want to come back and get some big points on the board. And then who knows, Alpine, I think they're obviously also in and around that fight for that sort of fifth quickest car. So I think it would be interesting to see which one of those comes out on top this weekend.
Yeah, no, definitely RB could be one to watch out for. Fingers crossed for Hadjar, he can get his stuff together after a disastrous Sunday in Australia. But one thing I do want to very quickly talk about, because I always like to talk about them on ShefF1, is Haas. So they were much slower than we were all expecting them to be going into Australia, even though it wasn't too dissimilar from most of their testing timing finishes. Of course, Behrman and Ocon in qualifying taking the rear of the grid, and then Ollie Behrman it just kept going wrong for him, crash after crash. And then of course the race didn't bear any fruit for him, no pun intended. But it was definitely a poor weekend for Haas. Could they bounce back here at China now the grid has been brought closer together? I'm not sure if they had any mini DRS running. It would surprise me if they did, just with Haas's track record of technological advancement. But I do hope to see something better from Haas this weekend, just because it was quite underwhelming in Australia, and I think Esteban Ocon deserves something better. I think Ollie Behrman needs to put on a better performance. Seb, how do you see Haas getting on?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, because they were one of the teams looking at it. Even you looked at pre-season testing, you just thought, they're just doing long runs. Like we won't read into their testing times, and thought, well, I'm sure they'll come out in Australia and be somewhat competitive, because the back end of last year they were probably the fifth quickest car.
Yeah.
They were competing with Alpine every weekend, it felt, for the last few weekends. Really, Hülkenberg was at times at P4 in qualifying. So it's strange they've taken such a step backwards. And when you think that the regulations, obviously it's the final year of the regulations, you think there wouldn't be that much technical development going on in the cars to make the pecking order that much different. So for them to go from competing for fifth to going now to the slowest car seemingly significantly, even potentially behind the Saubers, I think that's really worrying. It makes you think that maybe they're focusing on 2026, but I don't think that would make too much sense for them. So it's an interesting one. I think Ocon, he had a solid weekend last weekend. It was hard to see how well he actually did because he didn't really have a real comparative teammate to look at. So I can't see it getting much better for them because they won't have brought huge upgrades this weekend. It's only a week apart, so I don't think they'll be too different. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this track suits them, if they can extract anything from the car.
Yeah, let's talk about the team that they buy engines off, Amy. Ferrari. Again, a weekend to forget in Australia for them. Not really much to write home about, but can Ferrari bounce back in China? Some success there in the past. Leclerc with a huge point to prove, and as does Hamilton. How do you see the Scuderia getting on?
I think they can. I mean, Fred Vasseur has come out and said, that wasn't the true Ferrari. No. And I agree.
You'd hope not, anyway. It was poor.
I've heard a lot of hype this season around Ferrari, and also, the conditions were tricky. I can't lie. I know they're two really experienced drivers, but they had a slip up and a mistake from Hamilton. So no, it was Leclerc, wasn't it, who slipped? But I think China, there's rain in the race potentially
could help Hamilton.
Hamilton, exactly. But if they can qualify, I think it's all in the qualifying for them. If they can qualify at the top of that the grid, they couldn't even finish. I'm trying to think now. They finished so far behind in Q3. They were Q7 and Q8, weren't they? P7, P8.
Yeah.
So they had so many starting ahead of them, and then of course the conditions didn't help come the actual race. It was going to always be hard for them to be able to get past anyone. So if they can start high up, I think they can be involved with Red Bull, certainly Red Bull, and hopefully McLaren. But I just do still see them the third fastest team. But I don't think they're far behind from the pair of them, but I do think they're the third fastest.
Ahead of Mercedes?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I do think so. Yeah? Do you not think?
No, I think if you look at the pace from Mercedes last weekend, it was comfortable for them. I think
I'm just looking at the lineup there. Maybe I don't know.
I feel like China will suit the Ferrari down a little bit better than Mercedes as well. And I think Antonelli. I mean, you've got to bear in mind half the grid. A lot of the grid haven't driven around this circuit before. No. This is going to be a new track for at least. I'm pretty sure Antonelli hasn't raced there. I'm pretty confident to say that Bortoletto hasn't raced there, and that sort of same principle applies for pretty much all the rookies. Yeah. It is a track that has been sort of on and off the calendar for a few years now, and of course it doesn't really get much action in the junior series either. So it will be interesting to see how the rookies get on. I mean, we'll talk about Antonelli briefly now, as Seb brought up Mercedes. Really impressive race for him. Such a fun driver to watch, sort of, especially when he was lower down the grid, just making them really, really, ambitious dive bombs in the wet. It was so interesting to see a literal 18-year-old doing all that and then finishing P4. I mean, that was an outrageous performance from Antonelli in the end. The qualifying, definitely one to forget. However, the race was just a prime example of once he finds the groove and once he gets the pace, once he finds the lines, he's so good at manipulating other drivers into just sort of getting what he wants. A little bit of an error when he dipped his tyre onto the grass and span it in the runoff area, but thankfully was able to keep the car under control enough to avoid the wall. But Antonelli, hugely promising Sunday for him. But for Mercedes, like I said before, I feel like this track will benefit Ferrari a little bit more. If you've never watched the Chinese Grand Prix before, it is basically just a load of really long straights and really either medium speed or high speed corners. There's very few braking zones, but the ones that are there, so the ones at the end of the back straight, really good overtaking opportunity. And the one before the massive spoon curve hairpin thingy is also a nice spot to grab some moves there. But I think Mercedes haven't been wonderful in sort of straight lines, for a while now. The car does often overheat, however, in the rain, I can imagine that won't be an issue. But Ferrari, I just feel like the track is just better suited to the car, and I feel like they could have the upper hand over Mercedes this weekend. But I'm kind of with you, Seb. Mercedes just did look quicker in Australia. Kimi Antonelli, of course, being able to cut through the field, and George Russell starting high, finishing pretty high as well. So, no complaints there for him. He was excellent in Australia. I mean, I saw that meme, I think I sent it to the chat, where it was just does nothing for the whole race, finishes P3. I mean, you can't ask for much more. That's a perfect way to open the season for George Russell. I mean, how will Mercedes get on, do you reckon, Seb?
I actually think they're going to do quite well. I think I think if you remember back to last year, I know that Mercedes weren't amazing, but I do remember at times, I remember Hamilton leading the sprint for one. I think they didn't drop back a little bit in the race, but I do think that Mercedes, I do genuinely think they're the third quickest side at the moment. I even think they're going to be able to challenge Red Bull this weekend. I do think McLaren will still be by far and away the quickest team, but I think Mercedes, I just think they seem to have an easier package to handle than Ferrari, which, you know, you're looking at Lewis Hamilton now thinking, did he make the wrong decision? I know it's very early to say that, but yeah, I think Antonelli as well, you made an excellent point. I think that when he got in the groove, you know, just having, you know, those laps under his belt, that confidence, when he has that confidence in the car, he looked absolutely box office. That move on Albon late on, which wasn't shown on the broadcast,
oh my goodness.
And even just a simple fact that he didn't crash. And you look at the other rookies, they made mistakes. Almost everyone on the grid made mistakes.
Do you think with the rookie thing, because the only Behrman and obviously Antonelli didn't go out, did Bortoletto?
Yes.
So they were the two rookies who didn't go off.
Yeah, but come on, let's not put Ollie Behrman in the same bracket.
Behrman spun though. Even spun. He wasn't shown on the broadcast. Even he had a massive, quite big spin. Yeah, and that's why he was quite far off the back of Ocon by the end. It was like 8 seconds, even though it was a safety car. So
do you think that shows their class though? Them two, because I feel like they are the two coming in hyped massively. Because Behrman's the Ferrari, you know, like the academy driver. I feel like he's gonna take in the footsteps of Hamilton when he leaves, depending on how he does here at Haas. But then, of course, Kimi Antonelli, so much hype. The next Max Verstappen, going to start at Mercedes, and obviously had an incredible race. Do you think that could sum up their class? Because I think the rest of the rookies were just a bit.
I don't know about Antonelli, but I even though we've seen more of Behrman in F1, more strong Behrman F1 performances as well. If you look back to Ferrari, that Saudi Arabia drive and that drive in Baku for Haas was really impressive. His drive in Baku in the F2, when he did the Grand Slam, the pole, the sprint win, the feature race win. I mean, that was something to behold from Behrman. But I still think Bortoletto's a better driver. It's just it will be very difficult to showcase that, because if there is one team that will be slower than Haas throughout the course of the season, it will be Sauber. But Bortoletto, Q2 on debut, getting ahead of his teammate. I'd still say Antonelli is in that sort of league of his own in comparison to the rest of the rookies, because it was that battle he had with Hulkenberg halfway through. This guy is double his age, and he's doing that kind of like all the trickery on him with the dive bombs and stuff like that. It was just like such a seasoned drive for someone in his first couple of hours in an F1 car still. So it was absolutely mental to watch Antonelli.
I think I fell in love with Antonelli. I genuinely I love him so much, and like every Grand Prix I go to, I always buy a hat, and I've already decided I'm getting his hat my next Grand Prix, because I just love him. I can't wait to see him just progress so much more.
It's just mad because he wouldn't have even done freshers by now. You know what I mean? Like, it's insane. But and he's already got an F1 drive, so that is outrageous. But
I do think when it comes to Behrman, though, I think that he had a weekend where I think it's hard to say that it would maybe he was one of those that was a step above the rest when it comes to the rookies, because I mean, when you're at the back of the field, because you didn't even set a lap in qualifying, because you crashed a car twice, I think that it already says it. But then also when it comes to the race, the fact that he spun on his own and he was so far off the back, he's not even racing against anyone else. I think he almost crashed into Max Verstappen when he got lapped.
The blue flag.
So
I do rate him so highly though, and I feel like it is going to be hard for him this season, because he's, I don't know, maybe used to being in the best cars, obviously in F2 and F3, but now I don't know.
The thing is also that you do look at his last weekend off the back of last season, actually put quite a lot of pressure on him, I think, because you look at, it was Brazil. He had a bit of a stinker of a weekend, apart from qualifying, where I think once again he out-qualified Hulkenberg. When it came to the race, spinning all the time, and I remember obviously from Drive to Survive saw that Komatsu did have quite a big go at him, saying it's just unacceptable, you can't be doing that. And then it's another weekend, this weekend, where he's crashed twice in practice sessions, spun off in the race. It's not, I think pressure's building on him, and it's not like he's come off the back of an F2 campaign which was absolutely brilliant. I know at Prema last year it wasn't, they just didn't quite understand the car correction, that's why he was quite low down quite a lot of the time, but I feel like there could pressure eventually build on Behrman. I feel like if he keeps having weekends like this, and I know it's very early days to say this, but I wouldn't be surprised if pressure starts to build on him.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt it was definitely not one to remember in Australia for Behrman. It was it could be a wet weather thing, because whenever it's dry he does seem to look fairly competent behind the wheel of an F1 car. I mean, that Saudi Arabia drive was just wonderful, and he was trying all sorts of moves and they were all paying off, and it was a really strong showing for him. him sort of last season, and he was even younger back then, even less experienced. So I think it is just a case of, finding the groove, because this Haas car does seem to have under-delivered a little bit, considering where they were by the end of last season. In a really decent spot. It was just calm at the team, and now, lo and behold, it's the Haas mayhem. The circus is back in town, sort of thing. And so, it wasn't easy for them in Australia. So fingers crossed he can produce something better in China. Now, speaking of the Grand Prix, shall we go on to our predictions? So we do this every week for every race. We try and, do our best job of making as many correct predictions as possible. Seb currently leading. If you missed the start, Seb is on 4 points, Amy on 3, and I'm on 2, and that's after the Australian Grand Prix. But we'll start off with, because obviously it's a sprint weekend, we've got some more categories coming our way. So we've got the sprint pole sitter. Seb, who do you think it'll be?
I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri. I think that as you're seeing, quite a lot of my other predictions, I've gone for his teammate as being the dominant driver this weekend. But I just think that Piastri coming into it, I can just see him, he's got a bit of a point to prove, even though he did excellent last weekend up until that little spin. I think, he was really quick, and I can just see, maybe Norris just maybe building his way up to the weekend, whereas Piastri just comes in, takes it, and it's a bit of a random prediction. I can't have much to back it up. Either of them two could do it, I think, but I'm going to go for Oscar for sprint pole.
Amy, who have you said?
I have gone with the other driver in that team, Lando Norris. I think it's just so hard not to trust him and have the confidence in him this season. He did it so dominant last weekend, just totally bossed, being the best at everything. And I think he's going to do it again. I think he's got the confidence carrying on into this weekend. So Lando Norris.
I have abandoned McLaren for the sprint pole. I've said Max Verstappen, just because I think one of Max's real strengths is being able to just jump in the car with little time beforehand and producing a really, really impressive result. Of course, before sprint qualifying, the only session we have is FP1, and I feel like Max, with the when everyone has less resources and less data to go on, I just feel like his natural ability does put him above everybody else. And so with that little time to prepare, and the gap being close between Red Bull and McLaren courtesy of that rear wing, I think it will be Max's sprint pole. But then I can imagine, we'll move on to our sprint race winner now. I'm saying Piastri to win the sprint race. I just feel like, again, it's not necessarily a result that Lando needs to bring home, and I feel like Oscar is also another driver who can just jump in the car with little prep and go and produce a decent result. I feel like it'll be close at the top. It'll be him, Max, and maybe Lando, maybe George Russell in there as well in the fight for that sprint win. I feel like that could be a really, really entertaining watch. But I'm just going to say Piastri, have something a little bit different in there, because it's easy to predict Norris for everything at the moment, as he is the guy to beat, as Amy is proving here.
Going for my guy again, Lando Norris. I just think, so dominant. I'm going to carry that straight on in like a trend.
Well, Rudy said you're going for something different with Piastri. Well, it's not that different, because I'm going for it as well. So I think that if he does get on sprint pole, I think that I just can see him that, I think he's comfortable leading at the front. I think once he does get in front, he's able to hold off people behind him. I think he's a good defensive driver. I think if he does take that sprint pole, I can't really see anyone else getting past him. He's good off the line. And I think Oscar Piastri will win the sprint.
No, you are spot on. To be fair, the concept of a sprint race does suit Piastri down to the ground. Like you said, once he gets out in front, he is like a true champion almost, just so hard to get past, whether it's good defensive driving, or he just builds up enough pace in the clear air to build up a decent gap and make sure that no one's near enough to get past him. And of course, he has shown great pace in sprint races in the past. Of course, his first F1 win coming at the Qatar sprint race a couple of years ago now, before Lando Norris ever got any kind of win. So that is quite telling in terms of Piastri's short race distance capabilities. But let's move on to the more important qualifying session now. Amy, who are you saying is going to be on pole position for the Sunday?
Well, I'd love to go Lando Norris again, but I'm not. I'm going to go someone a little different. I think the logic as well of, okay, so McLaren are coming into this weekend dominant, but that by time it's actual qualifying, there's a bit more research in the team. They know how to set up the car, and I feel like a team who knows all too well about it is Red Bull. I can see them not coming second to McLaren and then being able to take that pole away from them. So Max Verstappen is who I've gone for my pole position.
I'm going to argue the opposite of that, in that maybe McLaren, once they get more of an understanding of the car, maybe if they do have to make some weird adjustment to their rear wing, then I think that once they've had obviously an actual race basically with the sprint race and then the sprint qualifying, open up Parc Fermé again, I think that once Lando's got a real understanding of the car then and tailored it to however he wants it to drive, I think that Lando Norris will come in, and then it'll sort of, the pecking order will resume as what we think it should be. So I think Lando is going to take pole and get one over his teammate after Piastri takes sprint pole.
As a McLaren fan, I hope you're right.
I mean, there's a lot of high-speed data by the time we get to a qualifying session in a sprint race weekend, and I just feel like by that point, I agree with Seb. Lando Norris should have enough tools at his disposal to be able to go and get pole position. He's also a driver that's just really good at producing a pole lap from thin air. Like, he is just when it matters most, he can put together a really decent one-lap special. I basically just echo everything that you just said. Lando Norris is my prediction for the man on pole. So what about the start of qualifying then? So if you're new here, just because the driver finishes on pole position, it doesn't necessarily make it the start of qualifying, That's become a little bit of a catchphrase. I might trademark that now. So our stars of qualifying could be, anyone throughout the midfield, someone that's, maybe outperformed the car a little bit. Seb, we'll start with you.
I'm going for a driver who last week I predicted as a flop of qualifying, but I think this weekend, once again, once he's already had a qualifying session in the sprint qualifying, once he's got that under his belt, can understand that. Maybe he might not do too well in the sprint qualifying, but when it comes to actual qualifying, I think Kimi Antonelli, I think he's going to be a real star to look out for. I think that, he's got that raw pace, we all know it, and as I said, I think Mercedes will do quite well this weekend, and if he got the car underneath him, and he's already had a qualifying session essentially, Kimi Antonelli, we know how good he is, and I think he could do really, maybe even out-qualify George Russell.
Yeah, I've gone with it too, Kimi. I think he's just going to really show his class once again, the fact that he's never raced at this track, but he's just going to be able to show his raw speed that he's got and finish above his teammate, I think, in qualifying, and I think that'll be the reason why he is the star of quali.
Yeah, it does feel right to have a Kimi back on an F1 grid as well. I don't really talk about that enough, but it's good to have a Kimi back. I've said someone on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. So you said the youngest driver on the grid to go and be the star of qualifying, and I've said the man who is the oldest by a country mile. I've said Fernando Alonso. I mean, there's not really much talk about Aston Martin going into this weekend. Australia, fine for them, wasn't it really? Stroll looked good. Stroll looked really, really good. But I just feel like this could be the weekend for Alonso to bounce back. It should be a little less hectic, even though, of course, we've got more, events going on with the sprint and stuff like that. I just feel like, of course, because of how young this grid is as well, with so little experience around this circuit, Alonso is the guy that probably has the most laps completed around Shanghai, maybe Hamilton, to be fair. But, I just feel like Aston Martin, again, they've gone under the radar. The grid's going to get brought closer together. It could be that gap. It could help bridge that gap, between Aston Martin and the top end of that midfield. It could be like a decent sort of little P6, P5 for him in quali. Not saying he'll replicate it in the race, because of course that is a lot more, there's a lot more that goes into that, and I feel like Aston Martin over a longer distance might not be as effective. But I'm going to say Fernando Alonso to be start of qualifying. I'm going to get my flop of qualifying out of the way as well. You've both just said Antonelli. I've said he's going to be my flop. Now, okay, hear me out. I don't think it'll be out in Q1 again. I think it'll be a case of he can make it to Q2, maybe even Q3. But I feel like overcoming George Russell this weekend so early in his career, I feel like it's a really, really tough task to take on. I just feel like he'll be behind Russell in a lot of qualifying sessions for the foreseeable, until maybe the sort of quarterly point, the sort of maybe 1/3 into the season. And I just feel like, I don't really want to put all my eggs into the Kimi Antonelli basket just yet. I want to wait. I want to just, wait and see. I think he'll have a really good race. Again, I think his race pace is just like phenomenally good for someone his age. His racecraft, his maturity behind the wheel, it's actually bizarre how good he is in race conditions. But over one lap, I still just don't quite trust it. I feel like we need to give him a little bit more time to sort of become more fine-tuned over one lap. But to be honest, I can see that prediction completely falling flat on its face and going the other way. But I'm saying Antonelli as my flop of qualifying. Who are you guys saying?
I'm going to go for Isaac Hadjar. Basically just slating him this entire podcast, essentially. But
Isaac, poor Isaac.
Yeah, sorry, I do actually like you, but I do think that just going into this weekend, obviously with the Helmut Marko comments, and I think he'll really be wanting to prove everyone wrong, and I think that maybe could try and push it a little bit too hard, especially when he's going up against Yuki Tsunoda, who's seems so comfortable with the car. And when you always see that a driver's just that much quicker than you, and they're just searching for something extra, you might push it a bit too hard. And I think that Isaac Hadjar, it's tough. I could see him maybe being also a little bit too reserved potentially potentially, if you swing it the complete other way, and then actually maybe being slow from that point of view, that he doesn't want to put it in the wall. He's got pressure on him now that he wants to be a bit, doesn't want to get a reputation as someone who puts it in the wall, so tries to be clean, and maybe then just holds back a little bit. I think there's going to be a lot going on in his head this weekend, and I think that could just play not into his hands, and I think he's going to be the flop of qualifying.
Yeah, to finish off a rookie hat trick, I've gone for Jack Doohan.
I saw the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think Bortoletto's in a great position, by the way, because he's just going so under the radar. I think because we've gone with Antonelli, a great teammate in George Russell, Hadjar, Sonoda, Jack Doohan with Gasly, their teammates are expected to get points almost every race, and if they're not, then they're not living up to the standards of that team. So Jack Doohan, I don't know, I hope it's not the case. He did great, actually, in the last qualifying in Australia, but maybe it was at his home race, and 2, I can't lie, I would love the story of Franco Colapinto coming back to Formula 1. I'm sorry, I like Jack Doohan, but I prefer Colapinto more, and I think he's got these 5 races is what we've heard rumours of to make a difference, and if he doesn't do it this weekend, I think it's just a downhill slope from here. So
yeah, I mean that would be great for drama, but it is a shame because Jack Doohan obviously has a huge target on his back, and Franco Colapinto is the man with the bow and arrow shooting at it. But I mean, I want Jack Doohan to succeed because it has been really unfair treatment from him. It has been, really quite sort of just, harsh, giving him 6 races before the season's even started and stuff like that. Very, very Helmut Marko-esque. I mean, he literally did it with Nick de Vries, and look how that well went, So, Jack Doohan, fingers crossed for him, results start to improve. But I agree. I do think he could flop in qualifying pretty big time, especially because, Pierre Gasly looked pretty good in qualifying last time. Okay, sure, Doohan had the number on him, up until the end of Q2, but then Gasly of course getting into Q3, not even finishing at the bottom as well. I just feel like he'll be a hard man to top this weekend as well. But yeah, I mean, just quickly, and again, not to stir up anything, 1-word answers from the pair of you. Who do we think is quicker out of Doohan and Colapinto? Don't think about it, just who straight away.
Colapinto.
Doohan.
Wow, okay. I'm leaning towards Colapinto, but his results did sort of tail end a little bit towards the end of his stint at Williams. But, that immediate arrival was just so impressive from him, despite the fact that his junior career, really wasn't that much to write home about.
Arguably pretty similar junior career to Doohan.
I'd say Doohan was more successful in the junior categories as well. Of course, he had more time last season in F2 to build up, a further, no, he wasn't in F2 last season. What am I thinking about? But yeah, Colapinto, of course, if you take that F2 finish last year with a pinch of salt, because obviously he was driving an F1 for half of that year, so who's the real winner there. But let's move on now to the podium for the race. So podium for Sunday, the top 3 drivers. Amy, who are you saying?
I'm going for Lando Norris. I can't ignore him, winning that race. I think it's just going to be a momentum every single race for him to win now. And then, of course, his teammate Oscar Piastri. I just don't think he can get past Lando at the minute. I think Lando's so dominant and confident right now. And then 3rd, I was going to change it last minute, but I'm not going to stick with it. I've gone with Charles Leclerc, and I think that is because I'm going with the narrative that Ferrari are going to be fixed this race. I think they're going to have the true potential of the car, and out of the pair, I think obviously Leclerc knows this team more. You could hear Hamilton actually getting annoyed with the engineers last race. So Leclerc understanding the team a bit more and them understanding him as a driver, I think he's going to be the one out of the pair to be able to go and get on that final spot on the podium.
Yeah, fighting all the bad language demons, Lewis Hamilton was, by the sounds of things, in the cockpit. Seb, who are you saying to finish on your podium?
I've gone for, I think, the most basic podium you can predict at the moment. The podium that it probably should have been last weekend. I've gone for McLaren 1-2, Norris, Piastri, and then Verstappen rounding out the podium in P3. I think McLaren will just have too much pace, and I think that with Norris being on pole, he's obviously got that demon behind him where, he can't lead into turn 1 or whatever, so I think he'll be comfortable from the front. And as he, has more races to lead from the front, he's more comfortable leading, and I think he'll be absolutely fine. And I think that he does have that extra turn of pace when Piastri does get close to him, just to be able to get away from him. And I doubt they'll fight too hard either as well. I think that McLaren will sort of just not like they'll say, oh, you can fight, but there'll be that sort of thing in the mind where you just don't throw it away, don't throw away a 1-2, and I think that Norris Piastri will be the 1-2 pretty comfortably, and then Max, I just can't see past Max. I think that he's clearly in my opinion, the best driver on the grid by quite some way at the moment, and I think he'll be able to extract the most out of that Red Bull once again and be pretty unchallenged for that third position.
Yeah, my podium matches yours. I've gone with a Norris Piastri 1-2 and then Verstappen to bring up the rear of the podium. I mean, it's this sort of new postmodern Hambot ver that we've got going on now. But it's I mean, McLaren are the team to beat still, even if, you know, this flexi wing does prove to be a little bit of a disadvantage for them. I just feel like, you know, again, we were talking about, you know, Norris not being able to lead, you know, into turn one if he's starting on pole and stuff like that. And that run into China, you know, into turn one at China is a really, really, you know, it is a great opportunity to build up some positions early on into the race because it's a really, really long run down to turn one. Turn one, of course, a great overtaking opportunity, really long, really windy. Loads of drivers can get muddled up and just find themselves 3 positions behind, even though they haven't really been overtaken by anyone in a sense. So if they've done nothing wrong through turns 1 and 2, because of course it winds back on each other, it can be a really unpredictable first couple of corners to call. But I feel like even if Norris does mess up the start and Piastri or Verstappen get past him, he now has a quick enough car to go and get them back. Maybe not immediately, but he can do it at any point in the race. And that is the difference between the McLaren this year and the one they had maybe, you know, halfway through last season. Maybe this time last year at China. You know, it's a much quicker package that they have now. And I just feel like Verstappen, it could play out in a sense of it could be McLaren are just miles ahead of him anyway. Or if he's struggling to get past Norris, which it's a possibility, you know, because that Red Bull probably isn't quite as quick as that McLaren. It could be an opportunity for Piastri, who is currently in P3 per se, to catch up to those two fighting at the front. McLaren can then sort of tactically get Verstappen out of the way to get Piastri through, and then, you know, maybe papaya rules, but I don't think they can do that second race into the season. But yeah, pretty boring podium there. Norris, Piastri and Verstappen. Time for the driver of the day now. Amy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm going for Yuki Tsunoda. I think it'll be another weekend. I've talked about momentum a lot, but coming off the back of that in Australia, being able to, qualify so high and finish so high, I think he's going to do it again just before his home race, actually. I think he's got that, just, I don't know, optimism. I think he's just got a point to prove, and I reckon he would have loved that on social media. Everyone say, you know, how he must have walked past that Red Bull garage, and I think he'll want to just keep on proving, and for his sake, I hope so. And also, he's got that, you know, leadership role once again in the team, and I think he does so well with it. I think it's quite a shock for people that he would, because he is still so young, but I think he's an amazing leader in that team, and I think he'll go. And I don't know what driver of the day means for Yuki Tsunoda, but I think at least a P8 and above.
Yeah, I think so. I think, as you said, he'll be loving all those comments, especially also Zach Brown coming in and saying it should have been him that got the seat over Lawson. Yeah. I think that could play into Lawson as well. I think Tsunoda, his confidence got to be sky high at the moment, and he's also got nothing to lose, it feels like. You know, he knows that he's going to be quicker than Hajar. He knows that, and he's just, I think he's flying high at the moment, and I could definitely see that. I did sort of want to go for him, but I've gone for Pierre Gasly. I also, before this, actually went for Carlos Sainz, but I changed that because I remembered there was a 40% chance of rain this weekend. And Carlos Sainz, I mean, his last couple of weekends in the wet haven't been good at all. Obviously crashed out last weekend, crashed out in Brazil last year. Pierre, even though last weekend, obviously he did actually spin out in the rain, so it sort of goes against what I'm saying here, but he's obviously a good driver in the wet. I mean, most of his podiums have come in the wet. I think he's a really good driver there. And I think Alpine, they'll probably learn from their mistake last weekend. They just stayed out a bit too long, and if there are any opportunities to be had, I think Pierre's one of those who can capitalise on that. And I think that even still, I think that gap between RB, Williams and Alpine is so close anyway that Pierre, I think that, he'll be able to, I think one of his only good weekends in the Red Bull basically was in China back in 2019. I remember he got like fastest lap or whatever, so it is a circuit that he does quite well at, and I think Pierre will get driver of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I've just changed my driver of the day prediction last minute. I was going to go Esteban Ocon, but I just feel like I didn't see enough from Haas in Australia to be able to warrant any kind of driver of the day shout. I mean, if it does rain, Ocon has had amazing success in the rain in the past, great wet weather driver, but I just feel like, a good performance from Ocon and Haas based on their pace last weekend might not be worthy of driver of the day. So I've changed it to George Russell, just because I think, even though, I mean, there is a very high chance of a podium for him, say if there is a little bit of mania at the front, or even basically based on pure pace, he could be towards the top. I just fancy his chances to pick up maybe like a P4, P5, something like that, finish ahead of Antonelli, and just have overall just a really, really solid weekend where he doesn't put a foot wrong, much like what happened in Australia. If we just very briefly loop back to Tsunoda, not only has he got nothing to lose in terms of this race, in terms of this context, I'd say for the whole season as well, because, if he does great, he does get that promotion to Red Bull. I feel like they can't wait any longer, and I feel like it will be a better season for him this season than Lawson if he does go on to keep up this consistency. And so, therefore, it would just be impossible not to promote him. But even if he performs badly and he doesn't get that Red Bull promotion, I feel like there'll be a load of teams in the midfield queuing to go and get his signature.
Cadillac as well.
Cadillac coming in, Audi, of course, rebranding, although I don't think they'll be changing their lineup too dramatically unless Hülkenberg does make that decision to retire. And, of course, Aston Martin opting for Honda engines in the near future, which, of course, is a very appealing factor for Yuki Tsunoda, as Honda basically just helped him with his entire career. So, I think for Tsunoda, the pressure is really off for him now, and he knows how good he is. I think we all know how good he is. It took a little while for him to sort of get to this kind of level, but now that he's here, it's safe to say that Yuki Tsunoda has finally arrived. But we're saying all this now, he could go on a bit of a mediocre run halfway through the season.
I feel like we've done this for the past couple of years. We've hyped him up after a great result, and then he goes on an absolute run of absolute stinkers.
He puts in a great run of form towards the start of pretty much any season, and then by the midpoint, it's not necessarily stinkers. It's just really forgettable.
P11, it's almost in the points, but just not enough.
But thankfully, he's had a teammate that will finish like P18 or something like that.
So that'll still look good, hopefully.
Exactly, yeah. So Tsunoda's a really good shout for driver of the day. But I've said George Russell. Seb has said Pierre Gasly. Now on to a more sort of somber note. We've got our flops of the Sunday. Amy, you've sort of directly contrasted one of my takes that I've just presumed.
I have indeed. I've gone for George Russell as my flop of the day. I don't exactly know why I've gone for it. There's no particular reason. I think it's because I think Kimi Antonelli will finish above him. Okay. So that is pretty much a flop if you're, finishing below your 18-year-old teammate who's only in his second race. I think that's pretty much a flop. That's pretty much it for George. I can't lie. There's nothing in particular. And also, I'm more on the Ferrari hype train than Mercedes this weekend. So therefore, a bit more of a reason why I'm going for that. And just wouldn't live up to expectations like he did in Australia, getting third. And, like you said, it was the perfect race. He pretty much sat back, drove, didn't spin, and got on the podium. So I don't think it'll be that simple this weekend for him, and that's why he's my flop.
Yeah, I've gone for Fernando Alonso. I think that it's a difficult one to say for Fernando. I mean, I have no idea how it's going to go, but I just think that he's probably going to be lacking motivation. And also, you look at Melbourne last week, that's a really poor mistake to make. I know obviously some gravel had been thrown up just earlier, but still, someone of his experience shouldn't be making that mistake. And I actually see that it's one of those weekends where come the end of the season, you see the race head-to-heads between him and Stroll, and it'll be like 23 or something like that in Alonso's favour. And this is one of those three for Stroll where he just about gets ahead of him. It's very close, but they're competing for like P12, P13 or whatever, and Alonso just has a race completely forgettable, and that's what I think it's going to be this weekend for Fernando.
I mean, one trend I have noticed about Lance Stroll, you are right in that Alonso will go like 20-3 by the end of the season, or whatever it will be, 21-3, whatever, you get the point. But I feel like whenever Stroll has one of the 3-4 good weekends he has in an entire season, the next one doesn't come for ages. Yeah. And so he started off strong in Australia, and he might continue strong. This could be a new Lance Stroll, which is a bit of a crazy thought, but you never know. You never know. Stranger things have happened in Formula One. But I just feel like he'll definitely have the number on Stroll this weekend. But I can see it not being an amazing weekend for him. I did have him to be my star of quali, but the race is obviously a totally different story. When cars unlock their true pace, Aston Martin could either get into the top 4 or close to the top 4, or they could just fall further and further behind. I could see either happening. I've said Jack Doohan to be my flop of the race. I mean, we've talked about him more than enough in this episode already. It's not a prediction that I wanted to make because I do really wish all the best for Jack Doohan, but I just feel like this is a weekend where, much like Isaac Hadjar, he's got so much going on upstairs, and not on his head, but in his head rather. But he's got too much to think about for him to be able to properly concentrate. And this is again a track where I can imagine he's probably never or very rarely driven around. So he'll have a lot to get used to. The car he still seems pretty unfamiliar with. I mean, that Alpine, it is hard to gauge how quick it truly is. I just feel like it could be another one for Jack Doohan, which will knock his confidence hugely, and before a string of maybe potentially good results, unless he is cut rather ruthlessly, which I can see happening as well. Time for the best team now. I feel like Amy and I have said McLaren. which is, sorry for any spoilers, sorry to spoil it for you as well, but I feel like we do need to put a ban in on McLaren pretty soon if their dominance continues, because they just are the team to beat.
I mean, we were so
moment.
used to saying, obviously, no Red Bull last year. We never did. We always go for McLaren because it'd be the second team. But now, I think they are the dominant team. But for this weekend, I think having that 1-2... The thing with Red Bull last year was it could never be them because it would never be both of them.
Yes.
But because of that lineup at McLaren and the car they've got, it's hard not to, because I just think so convincingly that they're probably going to get a 1-2 in the sprint and a 1-2 in the race. And it's hard not to, but we'll have McLaren this week.
We'll keep McLaren this weekend, but it is very much a case of it's hard to argue against the best team if McLaren aren't getting a 1-2. Even if it's just in the race, that is more than happy. I'd be more than happy with that if I was a McLaren fan. Sorry, but it is a tough one to really put in because they kind of are just a team to beat. Like I said, Seb, thankfully you've said someone else.
Yeah, originally I did go for McLaren, but just to shake things up, I've gone for RB. Obviously, they're one of the teams that I highlighted as potentially doing well this weekend, and I can just see that. Maybe not with Hadjar, and so it's gonna. You have to take this with a pinch of salt and basically think of it as just a Tsunoda having bringing home some good points for the team. But I also think that they've got a lot to improve from last weekend from a strategy point of view. Basically, the last few years they've been pretty hopeless when it comes to strategy, other than Monza 2020. But I think they're going to try obviously improve on that front. And Yuki's got the pace, and I also think they have actually got. I mean, if you take it from Melbourne, I do think they have got the 5th quickest package. So, I think that if they can, extract the most out of that car, maybe Isaac even, maybe I've downplaying him the whole podcast basically. Maybe he will come in and have a great performance and prove me wrong, and hopefully, because then that would mean I get this best team prediction right. But I think they are the 5th quickest team. I think in the hands of Yuki, I think they can get some good points. Okay,
shock predictions now. Amy, I said your best team prediction for you, so why don't you talk us through your shock now?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go for Williams. Something to do with Williams, because I think they've just been incredible so far last weekend, and I think both of them not going to be able to make mistakes due to weather conditions this time. So I reckon a Williams double podium, which I don't know.
Podium?
No, double points. Sorry, that would be a shock. What a 1 Lando Norris and a 2 free Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. No points. Sorry. I think both of them will be in the top 10, and I think I feel like that wouldn't be a shock if they have this momentum going on throughout the season. But for the second race, I still think that's pretty much a shock. Williams aren't a team to have both drivers in the points, so to have them both there, I think it's a great start to the season for them. And I'd be excited to see what they have, but I still think it'd be a shock because it's so early on in the season.
I guess it's a shock in the point of view that they are probably. I think you would say they've got the 6th quickest car, and if you just do the maths, they're both out of the points. So
should be finishing 11th and 12th.
Exactly. So I think it's not the biggest shock, I don't think, ever, because of the quality of the drivers, and they've got a competitive package. But I still think it's worthy of a shock prediction.
Thank you.
Okay, what we got next is the most Seb Alston shot prediction you could ask for.
I went for Pierre Gasly top 5 in a sprint or race. Who would have thought? I predicted him as my driver of the day. I think that this is it would be a shock if it happened, but Pierre's one of those drivers that I think you could easily see it happening. Maybe in the sprint, Alpine, they get their setup right, and everyone else gets it wrong. And Pierre in qualifying, we know how good he can be over one lap, and then in the race, with it being such a short distance, there's less time for Alpine to make some mental strategy, or Pierre to bin it in the wall or something like that. So I think Pierre, I broadened it to the sprint or the race just because I think there's obviously a lot more opportunity for that to happen. I think the sprint maybe could be more likely, but Alpine are pretty competitive. It would be a shock, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if it happened.
To be fair, I like that. Gasly did look fairly competent at Australia. I mean, it's again another one that's sort of quite hard to gauge, but I'd like to see that because I had high hopes for Pierre Gasly going into this season, especially now that Alpine looks a lot better than it did this time last year. I said double Sauber Q2, which to be fair might be a bit of a naive prediction, but they got painfully close to the points there last year with Zhou Guan Yu. And I feel like that car might not be as bad as we thought it would be. I mean, Bortoletto Q2 in Australia, which is hugely promising, especially on debut. Now, I'm not necessarily he'll out qualify Hülkenberg again. I feel like Hülkenberg could have the edge over him in qualifying this time. And I might extend my shot predictions. So if you're new around here, we do base our shot predictions and the points based on how shocking they really are. So it is sort of a wild card prediction, basically. So more points for more shocking prediction. And so I'd be willing to take a sort of penalty if I extend it to SQ2 as well. So maybe like 3 points if they were to do it both in normal Q2 and then, maybe 1 or 2 if they get into SQ2 instead. But yeah, I just feel like double Sauber Q2, I mean, China's one of them tracks that kind of levels the playing field a little bit as well. We've been saying that a lot this episode about the flexi wing, but China, again, if we just sort of look back to last season, it was one of their stronger weekends, and the car, I can imagine, is a pretty similar one to the package that they had last year. Hulkenberg, of course, hugely experienced. He's got a lot of laps around that track, way more than half the drivers on the probably more than half the drivers on the grid. But yeah, and then Bortoleto, I was just really, really impressed with that qualifying performance in Australia, and I think it's safe to say that he is possibly at the moment the best driver amongst the rookies, but I feel like Antonelli will get better, and it is also really hard to gauge how good Bortoleto truly is when that car isn't exactly up to standard. But yeah, I'm saying double Sauber Q2, and I'd like for that to happen as well. I feel like they need some positivity in that team before Audi come in. But yeah, that just about does it for our Chinese Grand Prix preview and predictions. You want to stick around next week on the ShefF1 channel, then feel free, because we will be reacting to them in due course. But yeah, thank you very much for sticking around. Thank you to Seb and Amy for your time again, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.